Have you ever walked into a place expecting answers, and instead found silence speaking louder than words? Have you ever met someone whose presence alone made you question your own path? The courtroom was almost empty when the young man stepped inside. The wooden benches still carried the warmth of a long day filled with voices, arguments, apologies, and verdicts. The lights above were dimmer now, softened by the late afternoon glow slipping through the tall windows. Most people had gone home. Clerks, officers, lawyers, all gone. But one man remained. Judge Frank Caprio sat at his bench, no robe now, just a simple jacket resting on the back of his chair. Papers were neatly stacked, as always. He was reading slowly, carefully, as if each word mattered more than time itself. The young man hesitated at the entrance. His name was Daniel Moore, a second-year law student. Intelligent, disciplined, exhausted, and deeply unsure of who he was becoming. He hadn't planned to come here. Not really, but after sitting through hours of hearings earlier that day, watching defendants come and go, listening to Judge Caprio speak with patience instead of arrogance, with humanity instead of distance, something inside him had cracked open. Daniel took a step forward. The sound of his shoes echoed softly. Judge Caprio looked up. "Court is closed," he said gently, then paused. His eyes softened. "But you don't look like someone here for a case." Daniel swallowed. "I'm not, Your Honor. I just needed to talk. If that's okay." The judge studied him for a moment, not with suspicion, but with curiosity. The kind that listens before judging. "Sit," Caprio said, pointing to the chair in front of the bench. "You look like you've been carrying a heavy question." Daniel sat, hands clasped tightly. "I'm studying law," he began. "Everyone tells me I should be proud. That I'm on the right path. But lately, I don't know anymore." The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was patient. "I watched your sessions today," Daniel continued. "You didn't just apply the law. You listened. You cared. And I keep asking myself if that version of justice still exists outside this courtroom." Judge Caprio leaned back slightly. "Tell me," he said calmly, "what made you choose law in the first place?" Daniel hesitated again. His voice lowered. "I wanted to help people. I wanted to make things fair. But somewhere along the way, it started feeling like everything became about winning, status, and money. I'm scared I'll lose myself before I even begin." The judge nodded slowly, as if he had heard this confession many times before, or perhaps had once spoken it himself. "You know," Caprio said, "this courtroom has seen anger, fear, regret, and hope, all in the same hour. And every person who stands here believes their story is heavier than the next." He paused, then added quietly, "The law doesn't shape your character. It only reveals it." Daniel looked up. The room felt different now, not like a courtroom, but like a classroom with no blackboard, a place where lessons weren't written, only lived. Outside, the sounds of the city faded into a low hum. Inside, a conversation had just begun, one that would change far more than Daniel expected. "Have you ever wondered what judges carry home after the courtroom empties? What stays with them long after the verdicts are spoken?" Daniel leaned forward slightly, encouraged by the judge's calm presence. "Do you ever doubt yourself?" he asked. "After making so many decisions about people's lives?" Judge Caprio smiled faintly. "Every day." That answer surprised Daniel. "People think certainty is the most important thing a judge has," Caprio continued. "But certainty can be dangerous. It can make you stop listening." He stood and walked slowly toward the window, looking out at the fading daylight. "When I was young," he said, "I thought being a judge meant having the final word. Authority. Control. I believed respect came from the bench itself." He turned back. "But respect doesn't come from the chair. It comes from how you treat the person standing in front of it." Daniel listened intently. "I've seen people walk into this courtroom carrying more than legal problems," Caprio said. "They bring fear, shame, pride, desperation. Some are guilty. Some are careless. Some are simply unlucky." He paused. "And every one of them expects to be reduced to a case number." Daniel nodded slowly. "I noticed how you speak to them," he said. "You ask about their lives, their families, their struggles." "That's because the law speaks in rules," the judge replied, "but justice speaks in context." He returned to his chair, sitting across from Daniel now, not above him. "You're afraid you'll lose your purpose," Caprio said gently. "But purpose isn't lost all at once. It erodes quietly when you stop asking why you started." Daniel exhaled, tension easing from his shoulders. "I feel pressured to succeed," he admitted. "To compete. To be ruthless. Everyone says that's how you survive. Caprio shook his head. No one survives by becoming smaller inside. He leaned forward slightly. Let me tell you something they don't teach in law school. Every time you choose compassion when convenience would be easier, you pay a price. But you also gain something no title can give you. Daniel looked puzzled. What do you gain? The judge smiled. The ability to look at yourself honestly at the end of the day. A long silence followed, not empty, but full. Outside, the courthouse clock chimed softly. Daniel realized something then. This conversation wasn't a lecture. It was a confession passed from one generation to another. What if becoming a good person isn't a single decision, but a choice you must make every day? The hour was late. The building almost silent. Daniel stood, sensing the conversation was nearing its end. I don't know what kind of lawyer I'll become, he said honestly. But I know I don't want to lose this feeling. Judge Caprio rose as well. You won't, he said. As long as you remember that your career is something you do, not something you are. He placed a gentle hand on the edge of the bench. Every day, you'll be offered shortcuts, labels, justifications. And every day, you'll choose whether to accept them. Daniel looked at him intently. And what do you choose? He asked. The judge smiled, not proudly, but peacefully. I choose to listen. I choose to slow down. I choose to remember that the law exists to serve people, not the other way around. They walked together toward the exit. Before leaving, Daniel turned back. Thank you, he said. For staying. Caprio nodded. Someone once stayed for me, he replied. Now it's my turn. The door closed softly behind them. The courtroom returned to silence, but not emptiness. Because some conversations, once spoken, never truly end. What if the most important lessons are never spoken aloud? What if they're hidden in moments we almost overlook? Judge Caprio returned to his seat, folding his hands. There are lessons this courtroom teaches without saying a word, he said. He described moments between cases, a nervous hand trembling, a sigh of relief, a parent wiping tears quietly in the back row. Justice, he said, is not loud. It's often subtle. Daniel listened closely. You learn to read silence, Caprio continued. To notice when someone is ashamed, not defiant. When they're scared, not disrespectful. He looked at Daniel with intent. If you only hear words, you'll miss the truth. The judge spoke of mistakes he'd made, times he spoke too quickly, assumed too much, or failed to ask the right question. I still regret some of them, he admitted. Daniel was surprised by the honesty. But regret can be a teacher, Caprio added. If you let it humble you instead of hardening you. A quiet pause settled between them. You're going to make mistakes, the judge said softly. That's inevitable. What matters is whether you learn to listen better afterward. Daniel nodded slowly. I think I've been trying to become impressive, he said. Instead of becoming useful. Caprio smiled. That realization alone puts you ahead of where I was at your age. The courthouse clock ticked on. The conversation felt less like advice now, more like a passing of responsibility. Is ambition always a sign of strength, or can it sometimes hide fear? Daniel sat quietly, absorbing the weight of the story. I think I'm afraid, he admitted after a moment. Afraid that if I slow down, I'll fall behind. Judge Caprio nodded knowingly. Ambition often wears the mask of courage, he said. But underneath, it's usually fear asking for protection. He stood and walked slowly across the room. When I was younger, I thought success meant never hesitating. Always pushing forward. Always proving something. He turned back toward Daniel. But proving yourself is exhausting. Serving others is sustaining. Daniel frowned slightly. But the system rewards results. Rankings. Wins. Yes, Caprio replied. And that's not wrong. But if results become your identity, you'll start measuring your worth in outcomes you can fully control. He gestured toward the empty benches. Every person who sits there is fighting something invisible. The moment you forget that, you stop seeing people, and start seeing obstacles. Daniel let out a slow breath. I don't want to become cold. You won't, the judge said gently, as long as you stay curious about people. He added, almost quietly, empathy is not weakness. It's discipline. Daniel looked up, surprised. It takes effort to care consistently. To listen when you're tired. To be fair when it's inconvenient. The words lingered. Outside, the sky had darkened. The courthouse lights hummed softly, illuminating the quiet room. Daniel realized he felt lighter, not because his doubts were gone, but because they were finally named. What if one single case could change the way you see justice forever? What if the law forced you to choose between being right and being human? Judge Caprio leaned back, his eyes distant now, as if opening a door to memory. "There was a case, many years ago," he began. "One I still think about." Daniel straightened, sensing its importance. "A young man stood where you're sitting now, not literally, but in spirit. He was barely 20. Charged with repeated minor violations. Nothing dramatic. But enough that the system wanted to make an example of him." Caprio paused. He came in angry. Defensive. Tired of being judged. The judge described how the courtroom that day felt tense. Prosecutors pushed for penalties. The file painted a picture of irresponsibility. "But something didn't sit right with me," Caprio said. "So I asked him a question no one else had asked." Daniel waited. "I asked him how he was doing." The young man in the story had laughed bitterly at first. Then his voice broke. He spoke about working nights, caring for a sick parent, falling behind, making mistakes, and feeling invisible. "The law said one thing," Caprio said quietly. "But my conscience whispered another." He explained how he chose an alternative, not leniency without accountability, but understanding with structure. A chance instead of a label. Years later, Caprio continued, "I received a letter." Daniel leaned in. The young man had finished school. He was working. Supporting his family. He wrote that one moment of being treated like a human instead of a problem changed his direction. The courtroom fell silent again. "That letter," the judge said, "sits in my drawer to this day. Not as proof I was right, but as a reminder to stay careful with power." Daniel swallowed. "That must have been hard. Going against expectations." Caprio nodded. "Doing what's right often looks wrong to people who only count rules." He looked directly at Daniel. "You're going to face moments where the safest choice is not the best one, and moments where the best choice costs you something." Daniel's voice was quieter now. "How do you know when to bend? And when to stand firm?" The judge smiled sadly. "You don't always know. You listen. You learn. And you accept that justice is not a machine, it's a responsibility."